We accidentally applied for a startup pitching competition. We win a spot in the shortlist, and then they were going to choose 10 businesses to each receive $100,000. And so we ended up winning a place in that, and then realised you can't take investment equity in a not-for-profit. And so we had to start a new business if we wanted to take up this opportunity. We had to drop, I think, 1.1 million of revenue from the pipeline, right? Because we just we've got to hard call this. And then when we did that, that's when we very, very quickly saw the change. I have never, ever worried about not knowing what's going to happen next month or what's going to happen next year. I've always just been able to roll with the punches. And I've now learned that is an incredibly important entrepreneurial skill.
Hi everyone, welcome to 23 Mile with me, Kayode Odeleyen. Today we're joined by Jessica Christiansen-Franks, who co-founded and scaled Neighbourlytics, an urban tech company which exited to Australian Securities Exchange Group listed REA Group. Jessica and her co-founder built a platform that helps property developers and asset managers to understand how people use the places they live and work. Before Neighbourlytics, Jessica spent 15 years in urban design and architecture across Australia, the UK, and Canada. She met her co-founder when she joined and later replaced Lucinda as CEO of CoDesign Studio, the social enterprise which Lucinda co-founded. The two of them took the experience from CoDesign Studio to found Neighbourlytics in 2017. The early years weren't pretty, as there were long moments of bootstrapping in between relatively modest fundraisers. By 2025, however, the platform had grown to over 20,000 neighborhoods across 12 countries, which led to the successful exit. Without missing a beat, Jessica took on a new challenge as Managing Director of the Wade Institute of Entrepreneurship at the University of Melbourne. On the show today, we'll talk about how Jessica got into urban design and why she left to start Neighbourlytics, how she and Lucinda built and scaled the company, the challenges they overcame, and how the successful exit came about. We'll also draw a line or put a thread through our career path, which has been non-linear, which has a lot of lessons for us all. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. With that introduction, you make it sound like it was all easy, right?
Yes, which is exactly the opposite of what we are here to do today, to make founders realize it is not all easy.
Yeah.
But like you said, congratulations are in order, because the last I checked, only about 2% of founders are ever able to get to an exit. So congratulations on achieving that.
Thank you so much.
Let's start at the very beginning. Let's trace it all back. Like you said, it wasn't all easy. We want to hear all of those hard times where you nearly gave up. But before then, let's start at the beginning. What was life growing up in Australia? And I know you traveled a fair bit. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I find this question really interesting because a lot of entrepreneurs had entrepreneurial parents. And so they often trace their drive to start a business or drive their own career path because they saw their parents do it. But my dad was in the military from when he was 16, and I think there couldn't be a less entrepreneurial job in many ways. He had the same job from when he was 16 until he retired. I wasn't even in Australia most of the time, but when I met people, the first thing they ever knew about me is that I'm Australian, because what's this, I've been 6 foot since I was 14, right? And we were in Asia and the Middle East, I definitely stood out. And so I grew up with a really strong sense of identity and community and belonging and migration. And, I had a lot of experience living in lots of different countries and feeling belonging. And so it was really natural for me to go into town planning. I know a lot of people wouldn't think of that as something that is to do with community and the complexity of the economy, but it really is. And so that's what drove me into that. But certainly I grew up really having no fear of the unknown. And I think that was the uniqueness of being a military kid, is that I have never, ever worried about not knowing what's going to happen next month or what's going to happen next year. I've always just been able to roll with the punches. And I've now learned that is an incredibly important entrepreneurial skill, especially to get all the way to an exit. Don't sweat the decision you don't have in front of you right now.
Very interesting. We'll come back to that. I was going to say it when you mentioned earlier that, your dad wasn't entrepreneurial, but I was going to point out that packing up, moving countries is deeply entrepreneurial.
Yeah, true. Starting again. Absolutely. Yes.
So, I ask for the podcast, but I ask for myself, having moved countries every 2 years as well. How did you cope, as a kid, moving from country to country?
Yeah, everyone I knew did it as well, because we were always in either diplomatic or military circles, or I went to international schools, or we lived on army barracks. But it's really how I learnt to empathize with my customer and know that your assumptions are never right? Because when you grow up in regional Victoria, in the bottom corner of Australia, which is one of the places I lived, and then moved to downtown Manila, and then moved to Damascus, which is what my life was like, moving different places like this, then to regional United Kingdom, lots of experiences like that. You know that people are just very different in each place, and you can't assume anything about anybody. And so I learnt to be really adaptive and read the people around me and figure out what drives them and what motivates them. And I learned how to fit in really fast.
Very interesting. Thanks for that. I never thought about it that way, but definitely that's very interesting. And at what point did you come back to Australia?
I was put in boarding school in high school in Australia. So my parents were still living in the Philippines. So I was about 14 years old when I started living back in Australia. But then as soon as I graduated university, I moved overseas again. I always was certain I would live overseas my whole life. In fact, it's one of my great disappointments that I'm now living back in Australia as an adult.
Very, very interesting. Okay. And then, so after boarding school, was that a point where you saw urban design as, that linkage to community?
Yeah, I grew up really fascinated by a sense of belonging and what it means. I could be in downtown Damascus, and even though I couldn't speak the language, or I was a kid, I didn't necessarily understand the culture. I could feel belonging when I went into the big souk or went into the big town squares and knew that we knew the neighbours. And then I'd move to other places where we would live maybe back in an Australian community or somewhere else, and I didn't necessarily feel like I belonged. So I always found that really interesting, this sense of the urban environment in which we live, the physical city in which you live, shapes your experience right down to your own sense of identity. It's not just can you catch the bus, it's also do you feel like you have worth and value when you know the people around you. So I was always drawn to architecture, landscape architecture, urban design, which is the realm where you study that. I was always drawn to that because I was interested in those theories. So I first studied landscape architecture, which was sort of the design, which I've always loved, the problem solving of design, but at the macro scale. Landscape architecture is a much bigger scale than building architecture, and so I did that first. And at university, then when I went into practice, that's not what it was in practice, and so I got quite quickly, I won't swear, annoyed at what it actually was in practice. Yeah.
Very interesting point there. What was I will say maybe the biggest one or two things that was different about the practice versus what you studied in university?
Yeah, I think, and this often came down to what I ended up being quite frustrated with generally in the urban development industry, in that a lot of us, depending on what, regardless of the role we're in, we are professionally trained to solve a fairly complex economic, social, physical, budgetary, like fairly complex problems. And when you are learning the practices of town planning or urban design, you're learning about the economic lever that you have when you put different industries near each other, or you change the transport corridors, or and how some of those decisions have really, really long-term effects. Most of the decisions had been made upstream by someone else. And the way I used to quite unkindly characterize it as my job became decorating architects' drawings. Someone else had made all the design decisions, the budget's been set, the policy's been signed off, the approval, etc., and all we're doing is creating a justification document for a whole bunch of decisions that have already been made. And it just always struck me as such a massive waste of time and resources. You know, all of these thousands of dollars an hour of highly trained people around the table trying to solve a problem that doesn't really need to be solved.
This is how many years ago now? Over 20 years ago, but I can almost still feel the pain. So, but
I was hard to work. I was hard to have employed in their team. I have no doubt that all of my old employers were happy when me and my opinions had moved on.
But how did you then, survive about 15 years in the industry, with this frustration? How did you cope?
Yeah, I mean, I always was very employable, so I could have a job, but I was really curious, and so I took the chance to move to different countries and follow the parts of that problem I was interested in. So I moved to the UK, such a cliche, an Australian moving to the UK after, but I must say I moved to Northern England. I did not move to London. And of
Very
all the
different.
places, yeah, I was in Newcastle, right? And of all
Wow.
the places I lived in my whole life, Newcastle was the biggest culture shock, I'll tell you. But what was really interesting, that's an urban design thing, because I expected that because the pop culture is similar between Australia and the UK, that a lot of the other aspects of our lives and our values and our urban environment would be the same. In Australia, yeah, we love our outdoor culture, but perhaps because we have so much of it, the urban planners are happy to keep sprawling our cities, whereas that is, even 20 years ago, was the ultimate faux pas in the UK. You absolutely did not build in the green corridor.
There's the HS2 now, the high-speed rail. There's a part of the UK where it's going through, and they have to spend, I think, some extra billions just to cover it up because they didn't want it to, to deface the environment.
Yeah, well, that's what I worked on. It's called visual impact assessment. And I
Ah,
worked on visual
very
impact
interesting.
assessment and landscape
Yes.
impact assessment after Newcastle, I moved to Bristol. And so I worked around the areas of outstanding natural beauty, around Stonehenge and around Cornwall and Devon and the coastlines around there, with exactly that, when there are wind farms going in or highways being widened, because there is such enormous cultural respect for the visual amenity of those places. There's a lot of rigor around how you think about designing them, but also through the construction phase and making sure there's no impact during construction as well. And we just don't do that in Australia, even now.
Sounds like you really loved the experience in the UK.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I ended up marrying a POM, so that's how close I
nice.
got.
But what then triggered the move back home?
Well, my visa ran out, so I had to leave. But no, I wanted to come back to Australia and study again because I wanted to move more into urban strategy. And so I came back, and I've got 2 unfinished masters. So the first masters I didn't finish was a Master of Urban Design. And I got all the way to the end and then just got the grad dip because that was enough. But I just wanted to step it up a level in my understanding of urban policy. And then while I was studying, I was fortunate enough to get a great consulting job at one of the top urban design consultancies in Australia. And in doing that, we were just on every flagship project in Queensland. So all of the really phenomenal town square upgrades and major urban renewal projects, and a bit of work overseas and around Australia. And even as a fairly young consultant, I was leading university campus developments and airport expansions, just really interesting, complex precincts that I just wouldn't have had the chance to do in another type of role. So that was a really super interesting type of work to be doing.
Very nice. And how long did you stay in this consultancy?
That's one of my longest ever jobs before I started my own business. So that was, I think, 3 years I was there for. Yeah.
Very, very interesting. And sorry, that is not CoDesign Studio, just to be clear.
No, that was Urbis. Yeah.
That was obvious. Okay.
Yeah.
And then how did coming to maybe CoDesign Studio, how did that come about?
Yeah, so I actually tried to quit urban design altogether, and I was trying to get closer to the impact. I kept being frustrated, as I said, about we're spending so much time talking about the impact of the project, but at the end of the day, often we're just consultants sitting in a room who've never even been to the site, let alone understand what it's like to live there. And we use a lot of grandiose statements about impact and social connection and community strengthening without really trying to put much rigor behind what does that actually mean and have we achieved it. And so I just got really jaded, and I went back to uni and started my second unfinished master's, which was in international development, because I was just trying to leave and go work in not-for-profit. And then during that master's, when I was just thinking maybe I don't want to finish this one either, I had the opportunity to join Lucinda at CoDesign Studio. And so what CoDesign was doing was they were a not-for-profit and they operated as a consultancy, working alongside the urban design consultants of the world, but doing bottom-up projects.
But does this take you back to like the do-good thing that took you into urban design in the first place? Did this feel closer to what you thought it was going to be?
Exactly. And what I found really interesting about starting that role is when I would explain to anybody who wasn't in town planning what we did, that they would say, isn't that just what town planning is? And I was like, I know, right? It's what it should be, but mostly it's not that. Instead what it is experts doing some drawings and submitting them. And instead of that, what we do is we go out to the community, we talk to them, we prototype what their ideas are, and then we vote with them on what the solution is, and then we get a great outcome.
Very interesting. So you were enjoying this job, but it evolved over time. I think you joined, and within a few years, you were CEO, if I have the facts right.
That's right. Yes, I was. I think it was 9 months. It was the time it takes a baby to grow. So Lucinda was pregnant.
Very difficult.
Yes. And so then she stepped out of the business for a couple of years, and I took on the CEO role in that time.
What became Neighbourlytics started within CoDesign, right? How did that come about?
Yeah, so with CoDesign, we had a lot of success growing CoDesign. It was the terminology is placemaking consultancy, and we were doing that at the time. It was really, really growing. So initially we were doing $5,000 projects, and within 2 years the average project was $150,000. Same client, but we just got a whole lot more accountability. And so we had to really rapidly scale that business. But the trouble with a really nuanced business like that is it's hard to scale. We had 8 amazing people. We can't just quadruple that and have 40 amazing people. Suddenly the pipeline of staff and how we do it was the biggest barrier to growth. So we were looking at different business models that would allow us to do step change growth. So we did a lot of self-guided research. Didn't know what a startup was, for example, but we knew that the tech world had some things that could do scale. And so we were playing around with lots of different programs and templates, and do we build an app? What's an app? Don't know. But we were trying to think out of the box about our business model to try and absorb the sort of demand that we had. And so in that process, we were applying for every grant we could. We were not for profit, so we could get a lot of grants, even though we were revenue generating. And in that process, we accidentally applied for a startup pitching competition, not knowing what that was. We were just used to rolling around pitching everywhere for grants. And so we get into win a spot in the shortlist of 20 businesses, and then they were going to choose 10 businesses to each receive $100,000. And that would convert into equity and then start the business. And so we ended up winning a place in that, and then realized you can't take investment equity in a not-for-profit. And so we had to start a new business if we wanted to take up this opportunity and divest it from CoDesign and have it as its separate business.
So, a very interesting point there, where I think I see some of the best things in life happen without a plan. Right?
That's right. I don't think the board was stoked when we turned up and said, hey, guess what? We got $100,000, but it does mean we're going to have to leave this not-for-profit and go start a new business. Are you okay with that?
But that was still a risk, right? Tech startups fail all the time. You had a steady business. What was the thinking around, do you leave something that's working for something totally new?
Yeah, it was a really, really hard decision what to do. And we kept coming back to thinking about what our goal was. And so a thing that you get really good at in not-for-profit is, especially a social enterprise where you're building your own revenue, not just taking gifts, is you're always thinking, what is my vision for how the world needs to be so that when I achieve it, I'm done and we can close. That's the goal. Eliminate poverty, or whatever the goal is. And our goal was around creating communities that people love and feel connected to. So town planners aren't doing that. We'll do it, right? And so that was our goal. And so when we saw the opportunity to build a piece of technology that could help accelerate that, and we saw the limitations of the consulting business was that we can't possibly grow the workforce big enough to have the impact we want to have, it was a no-brainer. We had to do the other thing too. And if structurally it had to be a separate business, then so be it. That's fine. And so, of course, we were able to recruit in a professional CEO into the not-for-profit, and that business and its model still lives on to this day. It's changed name since it's actually commercialized because it became so successful. And so the not-for-profit elements were handed to other not-for-profits, and the commercial bit has spun off on its own. But it was just really obvious that we needed something that could give us the scalability. We saw the moment in the market was then to do it because of a lot of developers putting money and attention into placemaking and creating connected communities. And so I don't think I spent much time worrying about the board. I spent more time worrying about where I'd get a salary from, which, I wasn't on a big salary anyway. So...
Wow. Okay. I mean, very interesting. So you have this investment of $100,000. You've got all this experience from CoDesign. How did you turn that into a business, into Neighbourlytics?
So the premise of Neighbourlytics, and this came from our subject matter expertise as using consulting to work with the property sector to create strong communities, create better places where people will thrive. And we could see really clearly that the biggest reason that wasn't happening is that you couldn't measure whether a community was strong or not. And that the ways of measuring it were bad. You could ask people or you could go and look, right? Sure, that might give you a one-off thing. But what you actually need to be doing is measuring little and often and understanding as this project is happening, is it getting better slowly over time? So we'd spent years trying to measure how good our interventions were in our not-for-profit, and we just couldn't get anything other than a 1 or a 10. And that's not enough nuance to make decision. And so we could see that because of digital data, Facebook, Instagram, it was Twitter back then, there was Google reviews, there were increasing places where you could just see what people were saying about local things. And that was the premise. If we just look in a city and say, what do people say about tall buildings? What's the sentiment? We just knew there was a way to make that into data. And so our idea was as rudimentary as that, is that measurements needed. We know people will pay for it. Let's have a go. Now, that is a very helpfully naive point of view. But what's really interesting is when we ended up hiring technical people and bringing some of the world's most incredible GIS data, geospatial data experts into the team, their observation was only a pair of urban designers could ever come up with this. No one with a mathematical background would ever think of it because it's such a niche use case. So it was, I like to think that it was the naivety of it that made it genius. And we got there in the end, but we made so many mistakes. We brought so many assumptions from the consulting business that were true there that are absolutely not going to be true in a tech business. And that hurt us for a long time.
But it sounds expensive. You have the GIS expert, you have the urban design part. You also needed to build a tech platform, right?
Yeah. And this was before AI could do it for us. Don't forget. This was back when you had to pay for every minute of that. So don't ask me any questions about whether I could do it faster and better today, because the answer is yes.
Yes. Wow. So, but you had to, how long did $100,000, or how far did $100,000 go in setting you up with a proper working platform?
Yeah, so we had some really great tech advice at the beginning around what to build and what not to build. And because we had the consulting background, that was really a superpower, because it means we could concierge the service. And by that, I mean kind of behave like consultants, go to our clients and say, we've got the ability to do this thing. And I already knew they would hire me as a consultant and pay me $80,000 to go do it manually. So if I could say to them, hey, I've got a technology assisted way to do this, I'm only going to charge you 40 grand and it's going to be half the time. Let me give it a go. Of course they're going to say yes, right? And so that's what we did is we went out to the same customer types, and we actually partnered with CoDesign on a number of projects at the beginning because it made their work faster and better to have this data set rather than having staff members on the corner with clipboards watching what happened. And so we were able to really sandbox the idea really early and focus purely on what is the reliable data to use, what of all of this big raw data that we can get, what is the best signal of what our people want to know? Is it the star rating on reviews or is it the words people use? And so we were able to, the first technical person we hired was a data scientist, and she was phenomenal. She'd been a high school teacher, which made it amazing. She could just explain it as well. And so she was a aeronautical engineer and ex-high school teacher. And so amazing Mexican feminist, one of my favorite humans, and she just could explain it. And so but she was very good at helping us, get past the noise of what we thought the question was and get right to the heart of what is the best data. And although across the 10 years of building the platform, or 8 years of building the platform, we would get distracted by how do you visualize it and give it to customers. The unique thing, our actual IP, the thing that got acquired wasn't the visualization interface, obviously. It's the unique proprietary intelligence we've put into the data system of how we create reliable insights from this fairly unstructured data sets.
Very interesting. And from what I see, what I read, within a year of launching, you had got to about $500,000 of revenue.
Yes, we had. So the 100 grand went quite far. I reckon we probably spent half of it on the first 6 months' salary of our data scientist. She did not strike a hard bargain for her salary. She was very happy to take a stack of ESOP and a very low salary, which was good. And then we spent about half of what was left on flights to conferences to go all over Australia and talk about what we were doing. And I wasn't drawing a salary yet. And then say maybe the last 20 grand was just on various office stuff and equipment and that, but mostly we were super lean. And then the rest was customer revenue. And so initially, the pricing was all over the place the whole time we ran the business. It's just really hard to price that. But we started off with fairly low repeatable pricing. And so we were really, even though we had that, the seed funding to get us started, we were much more like a bootstrapped company most of the way through, really.
Very interesting. I will come back to funding, but the business model you described, you talked about it earlier on that you were going in as consultants, charging a bit less. So it was a mix of services and tech. But it sounds like this continued beyond the initial set of customers. Is that right?
Yeah, we certainly carried that business model on for too long. And we're ultimately flipped into a self-service freemium, tiered subscription model. And we should have done that sooner. But the reason we made the decision to make it look like a services company initially is that that's what our customers were used to buying and that's what they were often looking for. So at the time, so this is like 2017, right? Yeah. So at the time, people were using words like big data, if you remember era, right? The era of big data. Data lakes was the most technical thing anybody had ever heard of, right? So it's that era. So we knew there was a lot of evangelizing in the market about data. And most of our clients were hiring a chief information officer of some kind who were using words like open source, and no one really knew what that meant. And so that was the market into which we were selling. But we weren't working, we were B2B. Our customers were not technical at all. They didn't want to buy software. They also didn't want to learn how to do analytics themselves. So even though there was a lot of interest in data, that these were not users that were going to come in and learn how to use a piece of software. And so we had to make it feel really approachable and sort of all buttoned up for them. But at the same time tap into that data trend. And so we would call it something like, what did we call it? I should have dig out the vault of the ugly graphics and see what it all looks like. But we'd call it like a community lifestyle report and then say powered by replicable, blah, 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 and explain the data that powered it. which gave it the trust and the access to this information they knew they needed. But our customers, like the buyer, didn't want data. They wanted a quick answer. And so what they wanted was to be able to open it up, read a sentence, and explain that to somebody else. That was really their task with it. It wasn't to plug the data into their system, play with it themselves, all of those things.
That business model is very interesting. I mean, for you, it definitely worked out for you. You said you flipped. But with AI now, we're almost back to where we were in 2017. So we'll come back to that. But on funding, you mentioned you had the the grant that got you going. At what point did you need to fundraise again?
Yeah, we did I can't remember exactly how far apart all of our capital raises were because they're all blurred together. Once you sell your business, you forget all the details. I think that's what I'm noticing. But we did what we called, so it was a pre-seed when we won the 100K. Okay. And then I think we did a $1.3 million, I guess we called it a seed round.
Seed round, okay.
Yeah, pretty fast. And our revenue had been 300 ARR, and then it jumped, 350 ARR, but it jumped to 500 ARR during the capital raise. So we were able to increase our valuation during that and get some really great investors on. And that was really the first time we formed, even though we had some investors from the pre-seed, the accelerator, that was when we formalized our board and had a proper shareholder agreement, and then also a group of investors that were in it to see the growth that we were trying to see.
And how did you find the fundraising process?
We ended up doing, I don't even know, 4 capital raises, 5 capital raises, who can remember, all fairly small. But I love pitching, and I love finding people that are aligned with what I'm trying to achieve. And I'm not easily put off. I am very happy to hear direct feedback. No. So that environment is fine. And I think only because I'm extremely stubborn, and I had sort of a career behind me where I'd done hard things. I was able to bring, and Lucinda and I were able to bring a really strong resolve into the fundraising process to make sure we were choosing the investors that were right for us. But I observed time and time again how much the investment process tried to turn us into a different kind of business. Yeah. And I think so often founders are taught to be desperate for VC backing, and that VC backing is the ultimate legitimization of your business. And if your business model is not VC backable, it's because your business model isn't good enough. And I felt uncomfortable about it at the time. But we were told again and again, I think you're an impact business. Go get impact capital. Oh no, you're not impact enough. Go and get, and I'm like, what? Come on, this is a great business making really good money. What are you talking about? And perhaps that's a little bit because the Australian ecosystem was much less mature back then. Maybe it's different today. I hope largely that it is. But I think often founders get really distracted by the performance of trying to or the game of trying to talk investors into wanting to join, rather than realizing it is an opportunity for that business for that investor to buy part of your business. It is a privilege. It is not the reverse. You don't owe that investor anything, right? And how do we bring the power into those discussions and feel that way really when we're choosing the investors that we will give the privilege of joining our cap table?
So, very consciously, you decided to keep the fundraising small, bring on aligned investors, but that meant you probably had to make a lot of sacrifices on your own salaries and, slower growth. Was there any point where you considered maybe we should take a bit more money so we can grow faster?
Yeah, yes and no. So we were able to we kept our capital raises small because we were making good customer revenue. And there was a lot of pressure on us because we were making good customer revenue to continue that customer revenue trajectory. And it's certainly something that we observe in the Australian investment environment that female founders in particular are encouraged to continue, and female founders tend to be more capital conservative.
Yep,
And
okay.
if I can be closer to bootstrapping my company and only bring on a small amount, that is the more prudent thing to do. So culturally, I'd come from that background, being from not-for-profit, being in a business that was almost bootstrapped. But what we were hearing when we were speaking to the bigger VCs is that, so we ended up taking primarily family offices, and family offices tend to have a big property interest. So family offices were a natural fit for us. And they're slightly more patient in their capital, but also at the time really interested in deploying into tech. And so we were really good in that trend. PropTech was getting a lot of family office capital back then in particular. But when we went to VCs, they would say things like, oh, your data would be really great for putting billboards in the right spot. Have you looked at advertising? And we're like, we don't want to go anywhere near that. So it was less about our growth speed and more about we were optimizing for our adherence to why we were doing it.
Very interesting. And, you mentioned something there about the heartbeat. COVID came in while the company was still relatively young. What did that do for your business?
Yeah, so it made us really, really good at collaborating as a team. Nothing really forced us to adhere properly to all of our asynchronous work practices like Jira and documentation and all of that until COVID. So from that perspective, it forced us to mature our operations at exactly the right moment. I think a lot of businesses do that too late, and we did it sort of as we were starting to scale rather than after we started to scale. So that was really healthy. But it created a massive roller coaster for the property sector. Right. And so the trouble with COVID is it meant people just started buying property rather than going on holidays. And so there was this huge property bubble in Australia. And so when property developers are selling lots of property, they don't bother trying to make them better. And so we could see the market shifting, and that meant that, I've reread, one of my favorite books is Crossing the Chasm, around the innovation adoption curve and how you think about your early market as compared to the market you scale with. And we realized that our early market were the evangelists. They were the people that were die-hard community development minded, developers that were trying to be at the front edge of something new. And we spent too long selling beautiful reports to them for 80 grand. That's not main market. And we shouldn't have got carried away with our ego. And I don't say that unkindly about my former self, but there was a good 5 years there that we were the darlings of the proptech sector. We keynoted every conference. We were on the cover of all the things. We were in Qantas magazine. Qantas has a magazine, and I was in it. Because we were the kind of poster people of this sort of tech world, particularly when it came to property meets impact. And we were category creators, but we forgot to, think about, what about once the buzz is over? And so that's what smacked us in the face as what the life was normalizing after COVID, is that the market had massively shifted, and we now had to sell into the group of pragmatists who were not trying to solve well-being for communities across Australia. They're just trying to prepare for a site visit. And so that's when we made the shift in business model, basically because we had to, because the market changed so abruptly.
And how did you deal with that? Was that a point where you rebuild the platform?
Yeah, yes. But we tried. The trouble is we'd been earning so much money from the other businesses, like from this sort of tech-powered consulting, which was awesome margin. So any of the previous consultancies I'd ever worked in would have died if they'd seen our bottom line. Like, it was amazing because we didn't have humans doing it all. It was all sort of tech-powered. And so that model felt really good and felt vastly better than the consulting businesses I'd worked in before. But it still was a one-to-one relationship with every customer. So a customer asks for something, we make it for them. The making it for them might only take 45 seconds and I can charge them $10,000, but it's still one-to-one.
Yeah.
If it's not there within 6 seconds, they're not interested. Yeah. And so we started to play around with the idea of what if we just start processing data and putting it out there? What happens? And we knew the quality would be quite different because we can't meet all the customizations, but we had a hunch that that's what the mid-market wanted for lots of reasons. And so we tried to do both. But when we did both, we just contaminated each one. It meant we were trying to sell to two totally different personas of people. And it wasn't until we killed the consulting and said no more consulting at all, no customization, which meant we had to drop, I think, 1.1 million of revenue from the pipeline, right? Because we just we got to hard call this. And then when we did that, that's when we very, very quickly saw the change.
You've kind of hit me with a lot of sudden changes, but this is another one. I mean, like I don't know, 5-6 years into the business, you do a complete platform shift, drop $1 million of revenue. How long did it take to replace this with this new model?
When we actually put our the rubber to the road and did it, it was only 3 months.
Wow.
Right? But that's by the time we actually stopped everything else, had actually wound it down. It takes a long time to stop delivering custom work, right? And we wanted to keep every one of those customers in our orbit so that we could continue to position the new product to them and give them something new and all of that. So it was a lot of thinking, maybe about 8 months of prep to wind down, And then I think we started on the 1st of June 1 year, and then by September it was done. And I don't mean done, finished, but we gave ourselves a really, really strict deadline and we just had the most phenomenal team of people. And we just did really intentional short sprints to say, of all of the things we've ever done, what are the 15 that need to be built into a one product for everyone? And how do we create the right user journey through it? And how do we turn what we used to have into something digital? Partly so that our marketing that had been in market for 10 years still worked. And the keynote I gave at a conference 4 years ago still felt relevant. We were conscious we couldn't entirely rebuild the go-to-market. So it had to appear familiar to what we had been saying. But the product experience was going to be totally different. And what was... the thing that preceded this, actually, you'll love this, is that we were having the moments where I was running through all the numbers to show, because the board was scared. Everyone was scared. The shareholders were scared about this. I will be scared. Right? Yeah, everyone was scared. And so I went back through all the numbers to say, okay, in one particular quarter, we had earned $600,000. We had 15 major logos of, Scotland Department of Tourism and the FIFA World Cup in Qatar and City of Sydney, all these major, incredible logos, the dream logos, right? And they had all given us net promoter score of something really high, whatever it was. They all left for reviews. Many of them had come back several times. Right. And by that stage, this sort of tech-powered consulting, we were giving them as a subscription. We were calling it a 12-month subscription, still charging them the lump sum up front, but saying, we're going to deliver it to you in a digital tool, and then you have access to that tool for 12 months, and it'll cost you 80 grand or whatever we were charging. And I looked across that same period where we've got all these great scores, all this great revenue, all these repeat customers, and we had 50 platform logins.
Wow.
Now, we had something like 400 people that are meant to be using it, and only 50, not unique logins, 50 people had ever logged in in 3 months. And we're like, oh my God, firstly, why weren't we checking?
Yeah.
We weren't checking because the revenue was coming in. We weren't checking because customers were telling us they loved it. And then when we checked HubSpot, we realized what was happening is that when we released the product to the customers, we'd said to them, would you like to pay an extra $1,500 for us to come and do a walkthrough for you? And we'll summarize what you can find in the tool and give it to you. And they were just continuing to open and look at the walkthrough presentation. They weren't logging in. And then it's like, okay, well, how do we then flip this into something that people will log into? Now, obviously, there's an answer here that is like, no one wants to log in. Stop trying them too. Sure. The early buyer didn't want to log in, but our hunch was if we made it easy, we made it feel like you come in and find a piece of value, like checking Google Maps.
Yes,
Open it up, see a thing, and then you might turn on Street View if you want, or then you can dive in. And so how do we turn it into something really, really easy to use? You don't need an onboarding session. You don't need to read instructions. You just log in and you can find it. And what we found is that a whole lot of other people that had been orbiting around us for years, who'd been saying they wanted to buy, immediately started logging in and using it weekly. So suddenly we tapped into this like pragmatist market that didn't want a 40-page consultant report. They didn't want an onboarding video and a walkthrough. They wanted the self-service tool. And it turns out we'd been ignoring them for 5 years while we were busying ourselves with these consulting reports.
Very interesting. You're so glad that it worked out well there. But would you say within a short period, did the revenue kind of ramp up from what you had with this consulting business?
Yeah, well, certainly we stopped focusing on revenue as the goal because our revenue was a vanity metric for us at that point. And this is the interesting thing I think about certain industries. The property sector has a lot of money. So whether they'll pay for something actually isn't the best indicator that they got a lot of value out of it. And when they're signing up for 12 months of access, you can't use churn because you're going to find out 12 months later. That's too slow. And so we were looking very carefully at what are the actual golden metrics that show us that it's successful, that they're seeing that it's valuable because they're putting their reputation, their advice behind this thing and saying, look at what I found and I'm telling you about it. And so we had a lot of sharing functions. We had lots of abilities for people to share reports with other people. And that's what we were looking at people doing. And so that for us became our like golden metrics of, is this customer likely to churn or are they likely to renew or expand? And that became true. And we started to see a really nice network effect. So people would come in as a free user. If they'd shared it with 2 or 3 colleagues within a certain amount of time, one of them was going to purchase quite quickly. So we could then automate them being invited to purchase. And then usually you get a paid user for a little bit and then often they'd upgrade and get a few more seats for their team and one advanced seat. So we'd see this sort of maturing. So we're focusing on that network effect. But we were also looking at the activation rate across all the different tools. So the premise being that we would, and this is often like classic product-led growth, you might have 50 things the tool can do. Don't tell everyone all 50 things. Give them one, get them to come in and do that one. And then once they've done that one, give them the next one they're going to want to do. And then slowly over time, you sort of drip feed them the rest, what they did next, and then continue to sort of reorder the nudges to optimize that first use to come in and get as far as they could in the first time they logged in, and then nudge them over time to come back and see more.
Very interesting. And was it this redesign and the new growth and increased customer use and love? Would you say this was responsible for the eventual outcome, the acquisition?
Yeah, and certainly what we couldn't predict coming, I mean, others probably did, but I didn't, is how much generative AI would vastly change the B2B SaaS space. I mean, now that's all anyone talks about. But if you remember a couple of years ago, we were all blissfully unaware of it. And, we had our own machine learning system in our data to clean our data, check it, so we'd been using AI before it was cool. So when we were looking at what's our AI strategy, we already had our AI strategy. We weren't thinking about the disruption in the market. But what happened for us is, we'd created this fully self-service end-to-end system where we didn't even need to speak to our customers anymore. We would invite our customers to speak to us if they wanted to, but mostly everything was so self-service they didn't need to, and which was phenomenal. But what we started to see, we still needed the bigger partnerships. We couldn't just rely on that incremental growth from freemium. So we were still trying to get in some enterprise, across big property developers or asset portfolios. And in the space of about 3 months, all of those conversations dried up. So we'd gone from being the darlings of the startup space and could invite ourselves into any boardroom to give someone the opportunity to work with us, we would often position it as like limited edition pilots, and you have to apply to us to join our pilot. And within 3 months, it dried up. And I now realize what was happening is the B2B data market disappeared, because at that time, big enterprises were trying to buy access to data platforms, which is what we were offering. And as soon as Gen AI came into the market, that was immediately replaced with an appetite for agents. And so they no longer wanted to have the data themselves. They wanted to have an AI agent that had access to a whole lot of stuff. And so that same phenomenon that took away our customer market enormously opened up our acquisition market, because suddenly the other big data players, it became more important than ever for them to have proprietary data. And most of them do not. And we are an incredible proprietary data set. The analytics that we created are globally ubiquitous, but designed by us across 10 years of change over time analysis. There's quite a moat there. I mean, these days, what's a moat? But certainly it's a bigger moat than other things. And we suddenly became very acquirable by those bigger players. So it was quite clear to me that either what we needed to do was tip in a whole lot money to really accelerate our go-to-market and try and ramp up our revenue ourselves, and make the bet that we could just be our own individual data player and beat the odd. That didn't feel like a good move, even if I could talk investors into doing it. But instead of that, the other option that was clear was to go to one of our many partners that we were already working with as a data layer inside their platforms and say, we're giving you an opportunity to acquire us. And during the acquisition process, our valuation tripled because of the market dynamic. So it was nice that it took 4 times longer than we had hoped.
Very, very interesting. Okay, so I mean, I'm an investment banker, I'm a tech founder, so I like this. But did you, maybe get into a bit of the specifics? Did you run a process? Did you do all of this by yourself, or did you have someone working with you?
Yeah, so we hired M&A advisors, which essentially are brokers, to lead the process for us, which was absolutely the way to go. I would say no matter how skint a business is, you should always get a broker, if only because you then just have a third party to get feedback from the potential buyers, just like you wouldn't sell your house without an agent. You need that other person to sort of be the devil's advocate, or do the follow-up call, or be the good cop, bad cop, and what we were looking for from them was, we already knew who the buyers, like the pool of buyers, so we didn't need them to bring those relationships, but we needed them to run a process that felt competitive and that had the feeling of a very professional process with a very rigid, like with a very well-run due diligence mechanism, and sort of, what was the step before that? We put the information pack together. And so when I hired them, I made sure that they were going to do all that. They were going to build the data room. They were going to build the information pack and sort of run that side of it, so I could stay in the business and keep it moving.
Which is probably why, like you said, you could keep running the business, keep growing it such that the valuation could go up. But you mentioned it went on for 4 times longer. How long did this whole process last?
Well, probably the better question is, how long was I silly enough to think it would last? So the answer
let's start with that.
Yeah, let's start with that. So the answer to that question is, because we wanted to get back to running the business, we opened the acquisition process in November, and we wanted to have an offer or withdraw the business from the market by February.
Okay, so 4 months. Okay.
Yeah. And partly because it's expensive, and we didn't want to bother putting all the docs together if we weren't going to get a good offer. So we structured it in a particular way. We went out to 24 potential acquirers with an invitation to join. And we thought, if we can get 6 signing the NDA and seeing the information pack, that gives us a good sense of where we might be at, and if we want to go to more, because they were all very different kinds of businesses. Some of them were the tech businesses, some of them were big consultancies, some of them were big property developers. We went to a spectrum, and so we got really mixed messages at the beginning. Like, every one of the categories was interested. That felt really nice, but made it hard for us to keep preparing. And none of them were ready to make an offer, a non-binding indicative offer by February. So then we get to February with I think by that stage, 16 of them were like, yeah, we still want to do this. We just have to wait for Jim to get back from golf or whatever. Okay. So it was and then we decided to keep the business on the market for a bit longer. We kept thinking we were just keeping it on the market for another month. So it felt like death by a thousand cuts at that point. We just, felt like slowly driving into a wall, really, because it hurts the business to be in acquisition mode, because you can't tell your team, you can't tell your customers, but you also can't make any big strategic moves, and you can't advance things with your partners, right? Because you can't upset them. You don't want to put something in place that would turn off an acquirer. So you've got to kind of freeze what you're doing while still making money and future-proofing the business. So it was really a bit of a fluke in the end, the way that it all came together. And it was buoyed by the fact that in June, we had, which is the end of financial year in Australia, we had the highest grossing revenue month of any month in the company's history. And we suddenly had like 3 years of runway. And we're like, okay, we don't have to worry. Let's just keep the business on the market. We've got the runway there. We don't need to sweat about new customers and partnerships. And
I mean, very interesting. Maybe just diving into that part a bit, because here you are facing a lot of headwinds. You had generative AI, which was taking your business. You had the distraction. I mean, even with bankers running it, it's still a distraction of the acquisition. But you still achieved this, landmark revenue. I mean, maybe briefly, what kind of drove that achievement, that success, that milestone there?
Yeah, well, the piece I also didn't say is that to put the business on the market, we took all the staff out of the business. And so my CTO and I did a lot of gardening, like literal gardening during that process, because we needed to demonstrate to the acquirer, because this was a technical acquisition. We wanted to demonstrate we had an incredibly sophisticated end-to-end data system that didn't require any operating overhead. And we were most worried about the legacy of our brand as being the thought leaders in the sector being seen as a deterrent to them buying, because we knew those big data companies didn't want a founder-centric business to acquire. They wanted a really badass piece of tech, and we didn't want them to assume our tech was rubbish just because I'm good at pitching. And so we strategically wound ourselves out of the business. So I was doing 4 hours a month and my CTO was doing 16 hours a month. And I was getting paid accordingly. And to demonstrate there's no key person risk in this business. We are just here to keep it ticking along and make sure nothing's gone sideways overnight, but really this thing is ready to go. And so, like, crazily, in June, that was a self-service situation. That was customers that had been, many of those customers were customers that had been consulting customers previously. And then as we pivoted, we'd been in a self-service product for about 18 months by that point. And they're customers that just eventually got it together, came back, and then bought a whole bunch of stuff in the self-service model. And so that didn't help the acquisition in sense of like the REA didn't need those customers to be in there, but it gave us the breathing space to take as long as we needed to negotiate.
Very interesting. And I mean, eventually, I think it was November 2025, the acquisition was announced, and you had partly stepped out of the business. You left immediately, right?
Yeah, so my CTO and I, his name's Gregor, so he and I continued to work with REA as contractors until last week. We actually only just finished, yes. So I've handed all the equipment over now. It's done. My baby has left home. Graduation day, I'm not watching anymore. So we were involved in the integration process to help with the handover. But yeah, we weren't, the actual moment of handover of a business is wild, right? Because really you just, these days, you just hand over a vault of passwords, right? And there it is. There's not like a drive with PDFs in it or anything. It's just this logins that you hand over in a vault. And normally you'd never put all your passwords in one vault. That's terrible security management. That's where you hand it over and then you sit there and wait for them to ask you questions about it, right?
Wow. I mean, congrats again. I mean, I'm conscious REA is listed, so I haven't seen any information on this, but so feel free to say no. But what can you tell me about how good the acquisition was for you and your shareholders and your staff?
Yeah. So it is confidential. You're right. I can't say what it was, but certainly there's a lot. So my uncle is a VC, right? So I should have known what a startup was well before I ever learned. But I had him helping me with the process and sort of helping me think about what to expect and what a good and bad deal looks like. And there's a lot of there's a lot. People often think that the dollar value is the most important part, and it's absolutely not. Right? There certainly how much money is coming out of the deal is one piece, but there's so much other nuance to how that money gets paid, when that money gets paid. Is it scrip? Are you getting shares? Are they? What are they buying of your business? What are you warranting? When does it get paid? All of those things. So from that perspective, we had a really phenomenally unencumbered deal, particularly. So not very, no earnouts, none of those situations. It was an all cash deal, and largely all of it immediately. And so we just found, really, I don't know if anyone from REA will ever listen to this, but they were just such a phenomenal group of people to deal with, incredibly fair and reasonable through the process. And I found that was quite a learning, actually, because a lot of people on my side of the deal were sort of assuming they would be hard, as in strike a hard bargain. And they're in it for a commercial outcome, obviously. But we found that assuming they were negotiating in good faith was a way better approach than assuming one of the terms was in there to get us. And there were a few moments in the negotiations when the advisors on my side were saying, no, that's rubbish. Let's go in and tell them this and tell them this. And I'm like, oh, it doesn't feel right. And between you and me and anyone listening, I went against what my advisors or my board said. And I just went and spoke to them directly and was like, human to human, I reckon you're trying to get this out of it. We're trying to get this out of it. Let me just explain why we can't sign it the way it is. And that actually worked every time. Which was, I would never just blindly take the advice of the experts again, trusting my gut and assuming they're negotiating in good faith. Obviously wouldn't always work, but definitely was the right approach.
Worked for you this time. Great outcome, learning something there as well, just negotiating based on trust. But once this was completed and announced, like you said, you had a consulting arrangement helping with the integration, but you ended up now in your new role at the Wade Institute. How come you didn't, take some time to relax, travel the world? How come you took this challenge on immediately?
Relax. What's relaxing? I'm sorry. Do you get anyone on this podcast that knows how to relax? I don't know.
Definitely not me. Not me at all.
Look, I found I was doing the acquisition process for 2 years, really. By the time from when we started right through into when we completed and had finished, doing getting the business ready for acquisition, putting it on the market, and then going all the way through was virtually 2 years. And so that is a very different type of thinking than the actual getting in and solving problems. And so I was just really keen to jump straight back in to being with a team, solving problems. And I do love the intellectual challenge of an existing business, and that's what I get to do with Wade. It's been around for 10 years, phenomenal business, amazing brand, amazing staff, some amazing products, and lots of space for doing new things. And that just felt like the change of gear that I wanted. I also needed to learn how to stop waking up at 2 a.m. sweating, and I'm nearly a year past the acquisition and I still do that. I still wake up panicking as though, my lizard brain is still in founder scanning the horizon for threats mode. So I need to learn how to change my brain chemistry and calm down from that. But I'd been gardening, I'd been, running the acquisition, and I just was really keen to be part of the ecosystem again and find my tribe again.
And how's it been in the past few months? How have you found it? It's definitely very different from the scrappy world of startups. How are you finding it in the first few months?
Yeah, so I love working at the Wade Institute because it is a privilege to work on the ecosystem when you've benefited from the ecosystem as much as I have. You know, I did 5 capital raises. I think I was in 11 accelerators. I've been to so many, yeah, it's too many, right? But I've been to so many networking events. And, you know, I was a landscape architect that couldn't find the door into startup. So the ecosystem that invites people like me in and helps create the bridge for us to come in and utilize this amazing world has given me so much. And I'm so passionate about more people finding the door and it not just being, you know, anyone that's smart, make them a founder and get VC backing. It's about anyone that's got an innovative idea. How can they innovate where they are with what they have, and how do we bring in innovation and entrepreneurship to them? So it's a privilege to be able to do it. I still wake up at 2 a.m. sweating about things I don't need to worry about. But
fingers crossed, all of that. With time, you get rid of all of that, and you can hopefully relax a bit. You know, I mean, I've taken so much time, but I mean, I could go on and on. But I have just a few questions before we go. Just adding back to something you mentioned around the business model. How are you seeing it now, you know, perhaps with the Wade Institute as well, with the AI business models? There's a lot of emphasis on, to borrow from what you said, clients not wanting to buy AI, but they want an outcome. Are you seeing a lot of that in your ecosystem as well, where that services or, you know, that tech-enabled services is what clients need now with AI?
Yeah, we do a lot of education on AI. It wouldn't surprise you. It's a hot topic in our world. And what I am particularly concerned about is that the conversation is mostly distracted by all of the cool stuff you can execute with AI. Right? And how any one of us can vibe code something immediately now, can do an analytics thing, etc. And that is phenomenal. But what that does is it lowers what your customer sees as valuable, right? And so if I apply what you can do now across the Neighbourlytics business model, we had spent, you know, I said our core IP was our proprietary data system. But we had to productize that so that people would use it. Do we make it a PDF report? Do we make it a presentation? Do we make it a self-service platform with layers? You know, that was a very, very slow and expensive process that had to take a lot of discipline for us to build the right things and layer it in properly. And firstly, in an AI world, a customer would immediately expect it to be higher quality and to get them what they need immediately. So I would suspect many users logging into our current platform today will either be scraping it and putting it in Claude, or will be frustrated with it because it doesn't meet their expectations, because their expectations are immediately that they want it to be customized and fit for purpose for what they have. So I think the businesses that are getting distracted with everything they can do with AI are missing the point that their customers are doing the same thing. And so in a world where everybody can execute anything, including your customers, the winner isn't the executor, the winner is the tactician. The winner is the person who executes the right thing in the right moment to learn something and then execute something better tomorrow. But a lot of people instead are talking about, do I use Claude? Do I use Cowork? Do my leaders use it, or do I democratize AI for my team? And I think that's missing the whole point of the question, which is actually, how is the market changing and how can I be more strategic because of my ability to execute?
I saw something earlier today around how accelerators now, in the US, YC and the rest of them, are now looking at all the founders, 40 plus, because they have the context, they have the experience, they have judgment to be able to know what to build and apply AI to versus the younger ones who just want to move fast.
I was speaking to my CTO about this on Friday after we finished handing our equipment back and we're walking out of the building, and we were saying, he taught me discipline.
Wow.
In product strategy, because I had so many ideas, so many things that we wanted to do, and he was able to say, great, but if we do that, what are we not doing? We had to take an approach of discipline of why would we pick one thing ahead of the other? Why would we pick it ahead of something else? In an AI world only, I would never have learnt discipline. I would have just filled up that platform with every possible thing we could ever do, and I wouldn't have learnt the strategic process of prioritization so that then I can learn. So the way that we worked with Neighbourlytics was that we would build one thing at a time, but every 2 weeks we would release something else and review what had happened from the previous release and be really, really intentional about what we were releasing and why, so that we made sure it was better over time. And I really worry about how anybody would learn that discipline in a world where it's just cheap to execute anything.
You know, I guess it's a new world, new technology. Only God knows how this will pan out. I have just 3 quick fire questions for you. And if you can answer in a few words, great. You've lived in a lot of cities. If there's one city you could go back to live that you haven't had the opportunity yet, which will it be?
Edinburgh.
Ah, very interesting. Cool. And then, what's one word you'll use to describe entrepreneurship?
I can only think of swear words.
Go for it. I've used swear words on my title previously.
Fucking fun.
Wow, I like that. I like that. And then, do you think you will build another business, or this is it?
I am certain I will continue to solve really interesting problems. It doesn't need to be inside a business that I've built.
I like that. It's all about problem solving for you.
Yeah.
And then last one, what's one myth about entrepreneurship that is not true, but most people believe?
That VCs are not the adjudicator of the quality of your business. That the myth is that they are the adjudicator. Yeah, they're just one type of capital for a particular type of business.
I like that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining me so late at night. I'm in Australia. Really love speaking with you. All the best, at REA Institute. I hope things calm down and you can continue to have fun without waking up at 2 a.m.
Thank you so much for having me.